ghostly whispers from an abandoned barn full of human bones, creatures tearing apart planes, the most haunted outpost in Afghanistan.
These are 10 of the creepiest events witnessed by soldiers. A small outpost located in Afghanistan has been widely regarded by locals as well as US, British, and Soviet soldiers alike as one of the most haunted military bases in the world, which is really no surprise when you consider the sheer amount of people who have died there during international times of conflict. One US Marine even took to Reddit to share his experience at the base, writing, "My unit's motto was not for myself but for the country. If I knew what I was going to have to witness there, I would have not done it for myself, and I also would have not done it for my country." Apparently during his time at the remote base, he and 2 other troops had stumbled across some bones while setting up their stations, and then some more bones, and then some more. That night during his watch, the soldier began seeing things, flashes of light that looked like weapons fire but were accompanied by no sound. In the weeks that followed, the lights continued to appear, but it wasn't until about week 3 that the soldier became seriously unsettled. One night, while on watch anticipating the appearance of the lights, the soldier heard an angry whisper, "Brozai Ruzie." It was Russian. The soldier, terrified, reached for his weapon and aimed at where the sound had originated from, but to his surprise, he was completely alone. A few weeks later, the soldier learned that prior to his service, the Soviets had actually set up base at that camp, and each and every one of them was killed in a pretty gruesome way. It is likely that the bones the American soldiers dug up on the first day had in fact belonged to the long-forgotten Soviet soldiers, and the Soviets weren't happy about their grave sites being disturbed.
This next story is called Don't Come In. It's a testimonial from an anonymous British soldier from a book called Tales from the Grid Squares, which features paranormal accounts from military personnel. This British soldier was stationed in Helmand, Afghanistan. The soldier was on watch with his partner. They'd pulled their rover up beside some sort of barn-looking building on a ridge. The rest of the soldiers had set up their camp down the valley. The two decided that one would sleep while the other kept watch. Well, in the middle of the night, they were about to switch shifts when all of a sudden they heard something bang into their vehicle. They got out to look, but there was nothing. It did continue to hear a loud banging sound though, this time coming from the inside of that metal barn looking structure that they'd posted up next to. They got a little closer and noticed that the door was chained up and rusted. They decided to grab the bolt cutters, but then the banging stopped. From inside, they heard what sounded like a whisper telling them, "Don't come in." It repeated over and over. The two rushed back down to the campsite to inform the base commander. Morning comes and the explosive ordnance disposal unit is called in. They safely open the door only to find that a mine had been wired to it. And inside are nothing but human bones and red-stained walls. It turned out the place had been locked down for a very long time. An Afghani told the soldier that Russians had butchered an entire village around there. Whoever had been whispering at the soldiers from inside, they'd been dead a long time.
In April of 2004, an American Marine sniper had been deployed to Fallujah, Iraq. During the Marine's time abroad, while patrolling the streets, he noticed an enemy taking aim. The Marine pulled out his weapon and aimed directly for the head of the man, but he missed, and so in an effort to ensure the target didn't escape or retaliate, the Marine fired several times into the body of the man, who then died a slow and painful death. The entire time the man was dying, he was screaming for help, but help never came, and in the man's final moments, he looked the Marine dead in the eye with the coldest stare the US soldier had ever seen. The Marine retreated back to camp, and later that night, he laid his head down to rest. It wasn't long after the soldier had finally fallen asleep that he felt someone climb on top of him and begin to attack him. He struggled momentarily before leaping out of bed, ready to attack whoever had been attempting to hold him down, but to his surprise, he was completely alone. It was then that the Marine came to the conclusion that what had attacked him wasn't human, but rather it was the spirit of the man who he had killed earlier that day, hungry for revenge.
The first thing that comes to mind when I say the word Gremlins is probably the classic 1984 movie, but Gremlins date back long before that, and the story behind them is actually quite eerie. It's always gotten under my skin. Tales about little creatures like fairies tampering with things, that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, but the term gremlin really started being used in the late 1920s, and to some, these creatures weren't just folklore creations, they were a very real and immediate threat. Pilots during World War I and World War II started spotting little creatures on the wings of their planes tampering with the aircraft. The stories began with British Royal Air Force pilots during World War I. They claimed that tiny, mischievous creatures called gremlins were intentionally causing technical problems during their flights. The stories became even more prominent during World War II, where they became so widespread that gremlins even appeared in military training manuals. Now, it's pretty clear that this was a case of something similar to mass hysteria, the stress of warfare. Up in the air, it must have been unbearable, especially in planes that often did experience mechanical issues. I think having a creature to blame these mechanical failures on almost helped the pilots cope with the fear and uncertainty they were experiencing at the time. But that doesn't make these stories any less spooky.
During World War II, a British company of soldiers was stationed in a remote village in Switzerland. For a while, things were normal, until they weren't. Soldiers at the base began to notice that certain things, wood, tarps, and valuables had started to go missing. The disappearances were noted, but no action was really taken. That is, until a person went missing. A young person. And then more young people, and then a private. It was then that the rumors began to spread. Rumors of monsters living in the Swiss mountains. One night while standing guard at the camp, a group of soldiers noticed a large shadow. Thinking it might belong to the culprit, they chased it out of the village and into the forest, which is where they stumbled across a small cave. To the soldiers' dismay, when they looked inside the cave, there was no one there. No one living, that is. Upon further investigation, the soldiers located the body of the British private. He had been wounded through the heart, and surrounding him were the half-eaten bodies of the other missing young people. I'm not exactly sure if this story can be classified as paranormal, but it is seriously disturbing, and in my opinion, definitely worth the mention.
This next case was supposedly classified by the US government, but details have been leaked over the years. So the story goes that back in 2002, a group of US Special Forces were on a mission in Afghanistan near Kandahar. They were patrolling a remote area when they came across a cave. As they got closer, they noticed a bunch of broken military gear, stuff that looked like it belonged to another unit, but where were the soldiers? Suddenly, out of nowhere, this massive figure came charging out of the cave. It was a humanoid creature about 12 to 15 feet tall with fiery red hair, wearing what looked like animal pelts, and it was armed with a massive spear. The soldiers opened fire, but it took this barrage of shots to finally bring the creature down. The giant's body was then taken away, and the soldiers were told to keep quiet about the incident. The official story, as you might guess, doesn't exist. There's no record of this happening, at least none that's been released to the public.
During a US soldier's second deployment to Iraq, something incredibly strange happened. While out one night on watch duty, he spotted someone carrying what he believed to be an IED, an improvised explosive device, and so the soldier ordered his sniper to take the man out. The sniper fired once, the man went down, and the soldier notified his superiors and the cleanup crew over the radio, as any casualties were to be bagged and brought into the Iraqi police station. When the team arrived to retrieve the body, they ran into a slight problem. There was no body to be found, and no sign of one ever having been there in the first place. No red trails, no discarded IED, nothing. The soldier was reprimanded by his superiors, but as the soldier said, a lot of weird happens in war, so eventually the incident was water under the bridge. That is until a few years later, at a local Iraq bar. The soldier sat down to have a drink with a fellow army man in another unit. In passing, the soldier mentioned the invisible man, as he called him. Immediately, the fellow army man perked up and shared a story in which a man was taken out by a sniper, but then suddenly disappeared without a trace. The soldier froze. How could that be possible? And then he got to thinking, What if what he had seen was in fact a ghost? Then that would mean there is an afterlife, and if there's an afterlife, he wondered, what will happen to me when I go? Will the Invisible Man be waiting for me? Or perhaps will I become the Invisible Man myself?
Jefferson Barracks is a military base in Missouri. It's become rather notorious for a hostile ghost said to stalk the grounds. Jefferson Barracks is the oldest operating U.S. military installation west of the Mississippi River, so it has a lot of history, and some say its fair share of lingering spirits. The most famous being a guard who took a bullet to the head during a munitions raid. He's known for being a total a-hole, and soldiers who are on guard duty at the barracks just have to deal with him. Guards have claimed to encounter the restless spirit, challenging them to a fight. Imagine standing there trying to do your job, and suddenly there's a dead guy wanting to throw down with you. It's said that some soldiers have been so freaked out by this that they've abandoned their posts. No surprise there.
In 2010, while stationed for 90 days in southwest Paktika, Iraq, a U.S. soldier had either a paranormal or possibly an extraterrestrial experience while out patrolling one night. At first, things were normal, until the soldier's military GPS device began acting up. Eventually, it started working again, but the soldier couldn't shake the feeling that the points on the GPS system had somehow shifted. He reloaded the map, but for some reason, his terrain still wasn't matching up with his system. The soldier then checked in with a fellow officer who confirmed that the GPS was working just fine, and that the location displayed on the device was in fact correct. The officer left, and the soldier decided to pull out his IR strobe device, which is basically a device that allows for covertly identifying and tracking personnel. And then all of a sudden, the soldier's skin started to feel as though it was humming. He looked up into the night sky full of stars and watched as something began to black out the entire night sky. He knew it couldn't be a plane or a helicopter or even a drone, just something big moving at almost an impossibly slow rate. And then everything went black. Next thing the soldier knew, he was waking up in the middle of the day in a mud hut. In the weeks that followed, the soldier often saw strange lights in the sky and felt the unsettling humming underneath his skin. Years later, during the soldier's retirement process, he had a number of x-rays taken, one of which revealed a small piece of what looked like plastic but was, according to doctors, probably made of metal, embedded in his right forearm. To this day, neither the soldier nor his doctors have any idea what it could be, but the soldier can't shake the feeling that it probably has something to do with that strange night in the southwest of Paktika, Iraq.
The attack of the dead men. Anyone interested in World War I history has likely heard this story about an army of undead Russian soldiers descending on the Germans, forcing them to retreat. What's incredible about this story, though, is that it wasn't actually paranormal at all, but it sounds like it is. And the German soldiers certainly thought they were witnessing something from the beyond. They were utterly petrified, and for good reason. On August 6th, 1915, over 7,000 Germans stormed the Russian Auschwitz fortress located in what is now northeastern Poland. They bombarded the Russian troops with poison gases and were preparing to swoop in and take the fortress with little to no resistance. But then, out of the haze, came soldiers with faces covered in cloth, their faces and uniforms also stained red with their own BLOOD. Some had even coughed up bits of their own lungs, and then there was their skin. It had begun to decay. They looked like walking corpses. So the Germans, understandably, turned tail and ran as fast as they could as the Russians continued firing at them. It's one of the wildest World War I stories.
For any of our friends out there who have been stationed overseas, if you have ghost stories, share them down below. We would love to hear what you have to say.
Definitely, 100%. Please
Stay
do.
safe out there. Cheers.
Catch you next time.